Hello and welcome to Chapter 2 of IELTS Grammar. In this lesson, you will learn how to distinguish between countable and uncountable nouns. You will also learn how noun countability affects articles, plural forms, quantifiers and subject-verb agreement. We will examine common IELTS mistakes involving words such as information, research, evidence, and equipment. At the end of the lesson, you will apply the rules to IELTS-style sentences and paragraphs. Let's begin. Why does countability matter? Whether a noun is countable or uncountable affects several parts of a sentence. It determines whether the noun can have a plural form, whether we can use a or an, which quantifiers are suitable, and whether the verb should be singular or plural. For example, students is a plural countable noun, so we can say many students. Information is uncountable, so we say more information, not more informations. Research is also normally uncountable, so we write research is essential, using a singular verb. Countable nouns refer to people or things that we can count as separate units. They normally have both singular and plural forms. For example, a student becomes students, and a university becomes universities. We can use numbers directly with countable nouns, as in 3 students and 10 universities. We can also use plural quantifiers such as many, several, and a number of. For example, several problems were identified. Remember that a singular countable noun and a plural countable noun follow different article and verb patterns. A singular countable noun normally needs a determiner. A determiner tells us which person or thing we mean, whose it is, or how many we are discussing. Student needs support is incomplete in standard English because student is a singular countable noun. We can say, a student needs support when referring to one nonspecific student. We can say, the student needs support when referring to a particular student. Other determiners include this, that, possessive forms such as my and their, and distributive words such as each and every. Uncountable nouns represent substances, activities, information, or abstract concepts that are not normally divided into separate countable units. They usually have no plural form and cannot follow a or an directly. For example, we say information, not an information, and research, not a research. Uncountable nouns normally take a singular verb. We say, information is widely available, research requires funding, and there is insufficient evidence. However, some nouns can be countable or uncountable depending on their meaning. We will examine those nouns later in this lesson. These uncountable nouns frequently cause mistakes in IELTS writing and speaking. We do not normally write advices, informations, evidences, researches, or equipments when using their general meanings. We say useful advice, reliable information, strong evidence, academic research, and modern equipment. In British English, accommodation is normally uncountable when it means a place to stay. Work is uncountable when referring generally to employment or tasks. If you need a countable noun, you can often use a job or a task. The intended meaning always remains important. Use many with plural countable nouns. For example, many students, many problems, and many opportunities. Use much with uncountable nouns. For example, much information, much research, and much traffic. Much is particularly common in questions, negative sentences, and formal writing. We can ask, how much information is available? We can also say, there is not much evidence. In formal academic writing, a sentence such as "much research has focused on climate change" is acceptable. In less formal affirmative sentences, "a lot of research" often sounds more natural. Several quantifiers can be used with both plural countable nouns and uncountable nouns. These include some, any, a lot of, enough, more, most, and no. For example, we can say some students and some research. We can also say enough jobs and enough evidence, or more vehicles and more traffic. The noun still determines the verb form. We say, some students are concerned, because students is plural. We say, some research is unreliable, because research is uncountable and takes a singular verb. Use fewer when referring to a smaller number of plural countable nouns. For example, fewer cars, fewer mistakes, and fewer job opportunities. Use less when referring to a smaller amount of an uncountable noun. For example, less traffic, less pollution, and less information. However, the simple rule has an important exception. Measurements of time, money, distance, and weight are often treated as single amounts. Therefore, expressions such as less than 10 years and less than $1 million are standard and natural. It would be misleading to say that less can never appear before a number. Use number of with plural countable nouns. For example, the number of students, the number of vehicles, and a large number of cases. Use amount of with uncountable nouns. For example, the amount of waste, the amount of funding, and a large amount of information. This distinction is particularly useful in IELTS Academic Writing Task 1. We write, the number of commuters increased, because commuters can be counted. We write, the amount of electricity consumed declined, because electricity is treated as an uncountable quantity. A few and few are used with plural countable nouns, but they do not express exactly the same meaning. A few means some and generally presents the quantity positively. For example, a few countries have introduced the policy. Few means almost none and emphasizes that the number is limited. For example, few countries have solved the problem. A little and little have the same contrast, but they are used with uncountable nouns. For example, the project received a little support means that it received some support. While the project received little support emphasizes that the support was insufficient or almost non-existent. Although an uncountable noun cannot normally be counted directly, we can count units or examples of it. We say a piece of advice, 2 pieces of information, and 3 pieces of evidence. For equipment, we can use an item of equipment or 4 items of equipment. Instead of a research, use a countable expression such as a research study, a research project, or a piece of research. For more than one, we can say several studies or several research projects. The plural ending belongs to the countable unit, not the uncountable noun. Some nouns can be countable or uncountable depending on their meaning. Experience is essential refers to general knowledge or skill gained over time. Several experiences refers to separate events. Paper is recyclable refers to the material. 2 papers can mean 2 academic articles. Room is uncountable when it means available space, but countable when it means a room inside a building. Time is uncountable when referring to time generally. It becomes countable in 3 times, meaning 3 occasions. Do not memorize a noun as permanently countable or uncountable without considering its meaning. Let's correct 5 common mistakes. Information is uncountable, so we say much information, not many informations. Research is normally uncountable. If we mean several separate investigations, we can say several studies. We cannot normally say an advice. We say a piece of advice. Equipment is uncountable, so we say modern equipment, without a plural ending. Traffic is also uncountable in this meaning. The correct expression is heavy traffic, not heavy traffics. These mistakes are common because the equivalent nouns may be countable in other languages. Countability affects several common IELTS academic writing task 1 expressions. Use the number of when the noun is countable. For example, the number of households rose. Use fewer with a plural countable noun. For example, fewer people traveled by car. Use the amount of when the noun is uncountable. For example, the amount of waste fell. Use less with an uncountable noun. For example, less electricity was consumed. Before choosing an expression, identify the noun and determine whether it is countable or uncountable in that context. Now it is your turn. Choose the correct answer in each sentence. First, identify the noun. Decide whether it is countable or uncountable in the sentence. Then check whether the noun is singular or plural and choose the appropriate quantifier or expression. Pay particular attention to information, pollution, research, and equipment. For number 7, remember that countries is a plural countable noun. Pause the video and complete all 8 questions. When you are ready, continue to the next slide to check your answers. Let's check the answers. Information is uncountable, while participants is a plural countable noun, so we use many. Pollution is uncountable, so we use less. Vehicles is plural and countable, so we use the number of vehicles. Advice is uncountable, so we need the expression a piece of advice. To describe separate research investigations, we can use the countable noun studies. Countries is plural and countable, so we use few. Finally, equipment is uncountable and does not need a plural ending. Let's correct an IELTS academic writing task 1 paragraph. Households is a plural countable noun. Therefore, we use the number of households, not the amount of households. For the same reason, we use fewer households, not less households. The level of car ownership is correct because ownership is treated as an uncountable concept. The number of cars is also correct because individual cars can be counted. Notice that countability determines the expression, but we must also choose vocabulary that accurately represents the data shown in the chart. Now let's correct an IELTS writing task 2 paragraph. Information, equipment, and research are uncountable in these sentences, so they do not take plural endings. Measure is countable when it means an action taken to achieve a result. Because the paragraph refers to several actions, we need the plural form measures. Cars can be counted, so we write the number of cars, not the amount of cars. Pollution is uncountable, so less pollution is correct. The corrected paragraph is more grammatically accurate without using unnecessarily complicated language. Let's review. Countable nouns normally have singular and plural forms. They can be used with numbers and expressions such as many, fewer, and the number of. Uncountable nouns usually have no plural form and cannot normally follow a or indirectly. They use expressions such as much, less, and the amount of. We can count units of uncountable nouns by using expressions such as a piece of advice or an item of equipment. Remember that some nouns can be countable or uncountable depending on their meaning. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more IELTS grammar lessons. In Chapter 3, we will study subject-verb agreement.